The insistent, desperate ringing of the doorbell was a brutal fist hammering against the oppressive afternoon heat. Each chime felt like a physical blow against Alara's already frayed nerves, a sound that had become synonymous with a peculiar creeping dread. Her heart leapt, a frantic bird trapped against the cage of her ribs, even as that familiar coldness pooled in the pit of her stomach. She knew with a sickening certainty that had woven itself into the fabric of her days what she would find on the other side of that imposing oak door. Or rather, what she wouldn't. She practically flew down the stairs, her worn slippers whispering against the polished wood. Her son Leo's anxious face pale and framed by dark curls peeked out from the living room doorway, his wide eyes mirroring her own unvoiced fear. "Mommy," his small voice quavered. The porch was empty, starkly, cruelly, undeniably empty. The cheerful chirping of her phone clutched in a trembling hand felt like a mocking counterpoint to the silence. "Your package has been delivered." The notification blared, accompanied by a picture. The image, time-stamped just 7 minutes prior, showed the small insulated box, Leo's life-sustaining medication, resting innocuously on their worn welcome mat. Now it was simply gone, vanished, swallowed by the pristine manicured silence of the Willows, a community that prided itself on its exclusivity and unyielding order. An order maintained Alara was beginning to understand with an iron fist, encased in a velvet glove, by Veronica Stenton, the formidable, ever-watchful HOA president. Leo, all of 8 years old, with eyes that held far too much weary wisdom for his tender age, tugged at the hem of her t-shirt. "Mommy, is it the medicine? Is it gone again?" Alara forced a smile that felt like it was cracking the very porcelain of her composure. "Just a little mix-up, sweetie. I'm sure of it. I'll sort it out." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her a telltale quaver she couldn't quite suppress. This wasn't just a mix-up. This was a cruel, calculated pattern. This was the third critical delivery to disappear in as many agonizing months. The first time Veronica had offered saccharine, perfectly modulated condolences, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. This was swiftly followed by a pointed remark about ensuring someone is home for such important deliveries. As if Alara, a single mother, working tirelessly from home, juggling deadlines for her fledgling online craft business, to afford the Willows' exorbitant fees and Leo's ever-mounting medical bills, could simply abandon her responsibilities to play sentinel on her own porch. The second time, Veronica's carefully constructed mask of sympathy had curdled into thinly veiled suspicion. Her perfectly arched eyebrows, a testament to expensive salon visits, had risen as she'd mused aloud, her voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawn about internal household discrepancies. The implication had been as sharp as a shard of glass. Perhaps Alara herself was irresponsible, or worse. Now, with Leo's current reserves of medication dwindling to a dangerously low level, and the next scheduled shipment days possibly a week away, panic was a live thing, clawing at Alara's throat, constricting her breath. The Willows. It had seemed like a sanctuary when she'd first signed the endless stack of paperwork, a desperate, hopeful bid to provide Leo with the best possible life. His rare autoimmune condition demanded a stable, stress-free environment, and the Willows, with its glossy brochures and promises of tranquility, had seemed the answer. The meticulously manicured lawns, the whispering willow trees that gave the community its name, the pervasive illusion of perfect, unblemished harmony. It was all a carefully constructed facade, Alara was beginning to realize, with dawning horror. A gilded cage, ruled with absolute authority by Veronica Stenton. Veronica, with her immaculate blonde bob that never seemed to have a single hair out of place, her designer leisure wear that probably cost more than Alara's monthly mortgage payment, and her uncanny, almost supernatural ability to materialize whenever a blade of grass dared to grow a millimeter too long, or a child's laughter echoed a decibel too loud. She was the embodiment of the Willow's suffocating, sterile perfection. Alara's first official written complaint about the stolen medication had been met with a dismissive wave of Veronica's perfectly manicured hand, her rings glinting coldly in the afternoon sun. "My dear Alara," she'd cooed, her voice a silken caress that barely concealed the steel beneath package theft, "is unfortunately a sign of the times, even in a community as secure as ours. Perhaps a post office box would be more suitable for your sensitive deliveries." The implication hung heavy and cloying in the air, You and your sick child are the disruption here, the aberration, not the unseen thief. Your problems are staining our perfect canvas. Days later, Alara received her first official HOA violation notice. Her porch swing, a small weathered comfort that Leo cherished, a place where he'd sit and read on his better days, was deemed aesthetically incongruous with established community standards. The fine was nominal, almost laughably small, but the message it carried was chillingly clear. Step out of line, question the established order, and you will be corrected, swiftly. The disappearances escalated, moving beyond the critical. Not just Leo's medication, but vital, irreplaceable supplies for Alara's fledgling online craft business, her sole means of income now that Leo required so much home care, began to vanish from her porch with alarming regularity. Each report to Veronica was met with increasing impatience, a barely concealed annoyance that tightened the HOA president's perfectly painted lips. This culminated in a thinly veiled threat, delivered during an impromptu visit Veronica made while Alara was trying to photograph new products in her garden. "You know, Alara," Veronica had said, her smile never quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes, which seemed to catalog every perceived flaw in Alara's slightly overgrown flower beds. "The Willows has a rather stringent policy on residents who prove to be, shall we say, a drain on community resources. Constant complaints, security concerns raised by one household. It all reflects poorly on the neighborhood's desirability. We wouldn't want property values to be affected, would we?" The unspoken hung between them. "You are the problem, and problems can be removed." Desperation, sharp and relentless, gnawed at Alara. She started talking to her neighbors. Her voice hushed her inquiries, tentative, fearful of being reported for gossiping or creating unrest. Old Mrs. Henderson, a sweet-faced woman whose prize-winning roses had inexplicably withered and died overnight, turning black and brittle just days after she'd politely questioned a sudden steep levy for community landscaping enhancements, confided her suspicions in a quavering whisper over a shared fence. It was her dear. "I saw her near my roses late that night. Said she was admiring the moonlight. There was no moon." Young Mr. Davies, a hard-working contractor who dared to park his work van, immaculate, freshly washed, but still undeniably a commercial vehicle, in his own driveway for a little over an hour while unloading tools, found himself slapped with a series of escalating fines. These were followed by a formal warning from the HOA about conducting unauthorized commercial activity on residential premises. He showed Alara the stack of notices, his face tight with anger and frustration. "She's trying to bankrupt me, Alara. I swear she is." A chilling pattern began to emerge from these hushed conversations. Dissent, however mild or politely phrased, was met with swift and disproportionate retribution. Subtle at first, a misplaced garbage can leading to a warning, a slightly overgrown hedge, drawing a curt email, then increasingly overt and damaging. Veronica Stenton was not just an overzealous, power-tripping HOA president. She was a tyrant, ruling her meticulously curated fiefdom with a velvet glove that barely concealed an iron fist. Alara, fueled by a desperate mother's resolve, decided she had to fight back in the only way she knew how. She ordered a state-of-the-art security camera, one with night vision and cloud storage, determined to catch the thief, this ghost who haunted her porch in the act. The day it arrived. Mercifully, this particular package made it through, perhaps deemed non-threatening. She set about installing it, her hands trembling with a volatile mixture of fear and burgeoning resolve. She'd barely drilled the first pilot hole into the porch overhang when Veronica's perfectly coiffed shadow fell across the porch boards. Alara's heart lurched. It was as if the woman had sensors for any deviation from the norm. Having some trouble there. Alara Veronica's voice was deceptively sweet, a melodic trap. Alara forced herself to meet Veronica's gaze, just installing a security camera. "Veronica, for peace of mind, you know." Veronica's smile tightened the corners of her mouth, pulling down ever so slightly. "Ah, yes, security. Such a delicate balance in a shared community, isn't it? You will, of course, be submitting the make, model, and proposed angling of the device for committee approval prior to full installation. As per subsection C, paragraph 4 of the newly revised bylaws, we wouldn't want any unapproved surveillance of common areas or neighboring properties, now would we?" Her eyes flicked meaningfully towards Mrs. Henderson's house. Alara's heart sank like a stone. The newly revised bylaws had been emailed out late the previous night, a dense 50-page document of impenetrable legalese that she hadn't yet had the chance or the stamina to wade through. Her application for camera approval, hastily submitted, was predictably met with an endless, frustrating series of bureaucratic delays. Pending full committee review, awaiting further clarification on lens specification, under consideration by the subcommittee for aesthetic compliance and visual impact. Each email from the HOA office, undoubtedly dictated by Veronica, was a masterclass in deliberate suffocating obstruction. Then came the attack that shattered Alara's last vestiges of fragile hope, the act that pushed her beyond mere desperation into a cold, simmering fury. Leo's specially adapted bicycle, a lightweight marvel of engineering that was his lifeline to a semblance of normal childhood activity, despite his frail health, was vandalized. Not just a flat tire or a petty scratch, but a brutal, targeted destruction. The expensive puncture-resistant tires were slashed to ribbons, the lightweight aluminum frame bent and twisted, as if by a monstrous force. Spokes snapped like dry twigs, the custom handlebars grotesquely contorted. It had been parked neatly in their own driveway, tucked away under the carport, supposedly safe. Ilara found Leo standing before it, his small shoulders slumped tears, silently tracing paths down his pale, freckled cheeks. He wasn't wailing. He was just staring, his youthful innocence fractured by the sheer malice of the act. The raw, unadulterated cruelty of it stole Ilara's breath, leaving an icy void in her chest. This wasn't random juvenile delinquency. This was a message delivered with brutal efficiency, loud and horrifyingly clear. You are vulnerable. Your child is vulnerable. Stop fighting. Give up. When she confronted Veronica later that day, her voice shaking with a barely suppressed rage that threatened to boil over the HOA president, was a mask of cool, detached concern. Oh, my dear Ilara, how truly dreadful neighborhood children I imagine. Such a lamentable lack of parental supervision these days, wouldn't you agree? Veronica's eyes, cold and reptilian, flicked over Ilara with something akin to distaste. Perhaps if young Leo wasn't encouraged to leave his rather conspicuous belongings so accessible. One must take precautions. The insinuation, the vile victim-blaming, was a cold slap in the face, more painful than any physical blow. This wasn't random. This was calculated. This was Veronica. That night, long after Leo had cried himself into a fitful, uneasy sleep, Ilara sat alone at her worn kitchen table. The mangled, twisted parts of Leo's beloved bicycle lay spread out before her like the pieces of a broken dream, a testament to the ugliness that festered beneath the willow's perfect veneer. The grief was a physical ache, a heavy weight pressing down on her spirit. But beneath it, a new, harder emotion was slowly, inexorably taking root. Fury. Cold, calculating, unyielding fury. She wouldn't break. She couldn't. For Leo. He deserved to be safe. He deserved to be happy. He deserved his childhood. She began to think like her opponent, like Veronica. If direct confrontation, if playing by the supposed rules, was met with overwhelming underhanded force, she needed a different approach. Subterfuge, evidence, cold, hard, undeniable proof. Veronica was meticulous, obsessively so, but everyone made mistakes. Everyone had patterns, routines, vulnerabilities. Ilara started to watch, to listen, to meticulously document every slight, every veiled threat, every suspicious occurrence, not just to herself, but in the wider Willows community. She cross-referenced her notes with the hushed stories from Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davies. She learned Veronica's routines, the Tuesday morning power walks along the perimeter path with her coterie of fawning sycophants, their hushed gossip and brittle laughter drifting on the breeze. The Thursday afternoon bridge club hosted in her immaculate sterile living room, the daily, almost ritualistic, meticulous inspection of the communal gardens and neighborhood frontages, her critical gaze missing nothing. The idea, when it finally came to her, wasn't a sudden flash of brilliant inspiration, but a slow, dawning realization coalescing from the disparate pieces of her observations. The packages weren't just being stolen for their contents, though that was undoubtedly a cruel side effect. They were a tool of intimidation, a way to exert control, to destabilize and demoralize. But where did they go? Veronica's pristine minimalist home, which Alara had glimpsed into during the HOA's mandatory fire safety inspections, which felt more like snooping expeditions, showed no sign of hoarded goods or clutter of any kind. It was as sterile as a showroom. There had to be a collection point, a disposal site somewhere. Veronica felt safe, anonymous. Alara decided to set a trap, but not with anything valuable, not anymore. The risk to Leo's actual medication was too great. She took an old, sturdy shoebox, filled it with discarded newspapers and crumpled junk mail to give it some heft. Then, with a stroke of grim inspiration, she retrieved an old pay-as-you-go GPS tracker, the kind marketed for keeping tabs on pets or luggage, charged it, activated it, and buried it deep within the packing material. She carefully sealed the shoebox, addressed it to herself, using a slight variation of her name and a non-existent apartment number at her address designed to look like a legitimate but slightly misdirected delivery. She left it on her porch early one morning, just as a new legitimate delivery of non-critical art supplies was due. She watched from her upstairs window, her curtains barely parted, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, as the uniformed delivery driver left both packages on her mat. Minutes later, Veronica's sleek, silent hybrid SUV glided past her house, its tinted windows obscuring its driver. The car slowed almost imperceptibly, then continued on its way down the street. Alara's stomach tightened into a knot. Had she miscalculated? Had Veronica sensed the trap? Then, almost an hour later, well after dusk, had bled into true darkness, a figure dressed in dark, nondescript clothing hood, pulled low to obscure their face, moved with swift, practiced silence across her lawn. The figure didn't even glance at the larger art supply box. Instead, it snatched the shoebox, the decoy, and melted back into the shadows between the houses with an unnerving speed. Alara's hands trembled as she pulled up the GPS tracking app on her phone. A small red dot blinked to life, moving steadily, purposefully away from the willows. It didn't head towards Veronica's house, which was only a few streets over. Instead, it traveled several miles east, towards a sprawling industrial park on the outskirts of town, an anonymous, grim area of featureless warehouses, drab commercial units, and chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. The dot finally came to rest, blinking patiently at a large self-storage facility, Lock and Leave Secure Storage, a generic name for a generic place. The next morning, feigning a sudden, urgent need for packing supplies for her business, Alara visited Lock and Leave. The air inside the reception office was stale-smelling of old coffee and disinfectant. She rented the smallest, cheapest available unit, her mind racing, trying to appear casual, as she filled out the paperwork under the tired gaze of the attendant. The attendant, a man named Henderson, no relation to her neighbor, she'd quickly ascertained with a pang of disappointment. That would have been too convenient, seemed less bored and more watchful. His eyes, small and sharp, lingered on her a moment too long. When she casually asked about the facility's security, he gave a short, almost challenging laugh. Best in the state, lady. 24-hour digital surveillance, individual gate codes, motion sensors, perimeter alarms, the works. Nothing gets in or out without us knowing. He tapped a pen against a thick ledger. We got some high-profile clients here. Very discreet. The way he said discreet sent a small shiver down Alara's spine. Armed with a unit number, gleaned from a risky but ultimately successful late-night observation of the dark-clad figure, it was unmistakably Veronica, her face tight and unsmiling, in the brief, unforgiving flash of a passing streetlight as she exited her car and keyed in a code at a side gate of the facility, returning to the storage place a few nights after the decoy theft. Alara now had a specific target within Lock and Leave. Gaining access to that unit was the immediate, overwhelming problem. She couldn't risk a break-in. That would make any evidence inadmissible and land her in serious trouble. She needed leverage or a stroke of incredible luck. Luck. It turned out arrived in the unexpected form of Mrs. Henderson's nephew, Mark. A surprisingly tech-savvy young man, in his late 20s with bright, intelligent eyes and a restless energy, he'd come for an extended visit to help his aunt with some repairs, and had heard the worried whispers about Alara's ongoing struggles and the community's oppressive atmosphere. Mark, it turned out, had a background in digital forensics and cybersecurity, and possessed a healthy, ingrained disdain for bullies and abusers of power. He listened to Alara's story, his expression growing more intent, more focused, with each horrifying detail she recounted, from the stolen medication to the vandalized bicycle to the GPS tracker. When she mentioned Lock and Leave and the name of the Shell Corporation she'd painstakingly traced from a discarded rain-soaked water bill she'd found stuffed into a public trash can near the suspected storage unit, Willow Creek Logistics, Mark's eyes lit up with a spark of recognition. Willow Creek Logistics. He mused, his fingers already flying across his laptop keyboard with practiced speed. That name rings a distant bell. Give me a second. The clatter of keys filled the small space of Mrs. Henderson's cozy lace-curtained kitchen. They're listed as a subsidiary. Yes, here it is. A subsidiary of a much larger entity called Willow Creek Developments. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, a frown creasing his brow. And Willow Creek Developments. Its principal owner is listed as one Mr. Arthur Jenkins. Arthur Jenkins. The name was vaguely, unpleasantly familiar to Alara. He was a prominent local developer, a man whose face occasionally graced the society pages of the local newspaper, lauded for his philanthropy and his generous contributions to various community projects. He'd even attended the Willow's annual summer barbecue last year, Alara recalled with a sickening lurch. He had exuded bonhomie and easy charm, shaking hands with residents, patting children on the head, and publicly complimenting Veronica on her exceptional stewardship and visionary leadership of the community. Veronica had practically preened under his praise. Mark, now fully absorbed, dug deeper, his laptop screen alive with complex data streams and obscure database queries. Willow Creek Developments, he discovered, had been quietly, aggressively acquiring properties bordering the Willows for the past 18 months. These were often older, slightly less pristine properties that had coincidentally recently suffered a spate of inexplicable misfortunes: unexplained burst pipes leading to extensive water damage, sudden and severe pest infestations requiring costly remediation, a relentless stream of anonymous complaints to city code enforcement about trivial infractions. The pattern was chillingly, sickeningly familiar. It mirrored what was happening within the Willows to residents like her, Mrs. Henderson, and Mr. Davies. Alara, Mark, said, his voice grim, his earlier excitement replaced by a somber understanding. I don't think Veronica is just a power-tripping HOA president with a cruel streak. I think she's a pawn, or at least a very well-compensated foot soldier in a much larger, more insidious game. He turned the laptop to show her a map, highlighting the properties Jenkins had acquired and the ones currently experiencing issues. Jenkins wants to expand his luxury developments. The Willows itself is prime real estate, but some of the older individually owned lots on the periphery, like yours, Alara, and like your aunt's, Mrs. Henderson, are in the way of his grand vision. He can't force a sale, not easily, not without attracting unwanted attention. But if life becomes unbearable, Alara finished, a cold knot of horrified understanding tightening in her chest, the pieces clicking into place with dreadful clarity. If property values are subtly, or not so subtly, undermined by a growing perception of crime disorder and HOA mismanagement, he can make people an offer they feel they can't refuse, Mark confirmed. A lowball offer, probably presented as a generous way out of a bad situation he helped create. The stolen packages, the escalating harassment, the fines, the vandalism. It wasn't just petty spite from a vindictive woman. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare and economic attrition, meticulously designed to break resident spirits, to crush their resolve, to make them desperate to escape the Willows, even at a financial loss. And Veronica Stenton, in her designer leisure wear, and with her iron grip on the HOA, was Jenkins' enforcer, his carefully chosen instrument, systematically destabilizing the community from within, targeting anyone who might resist, ask too many questions, or draw unwanted outside attention to their perfect, profitable little kingdom. The true horrifying scale of the situation settled upon Alara, heavy and suffocating. This was bigger and far more insidious than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about a stolen package of medicine. It was about greed, corruption, and the ruthless exploitation of vulnerable people. But now she had names. She had a motive. She was starting to see the outlines of the conspiracy. She still needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, to directly link Veronica to the contents of that storage unit and to tie Jenkins conclusively to the entire vile scheme. Mark, using a sophisticated analysis of public Wi-Fi signal cell tower triangulation data and even subpoenaed through a friendly contact in the DA's office, intrigued by the preliminary findings anonymized data from the lock and leave facility's own security system logs, around the times Alara had noted suspicious activity, managed to isolate a specific burner phone consistently present near Veronica's known locations and the storage facility. He couldn't crack the encryption on the phone itself, not without more resources and legal authority, but he found its purchase record bought with cash from a big box electronics store in a neighboring town. The security camera footage from the store, though grainy and taken from a distance, showed a woman whose build, expensive handbag, and even the distinctive way she tilted her head were unmistakably, chillingly Veronica's. It was circumstantial, yes, but incredibly damning when added to the growing pile of evidence. Mark also discovered something else. Lock and Leave, Secure Storage, wasn't an independent business. Its parent company was another anonymous LLC, which, after several layers of corporate obfuscation, was ultimately owned by Willow Creek Developments. Jenkins owned the very facility where the stolen goods were likely being stashed. The attendant Henderson wasn't just an employee. He was Jenkins' man, ensuring the discretion of certain clients. His boast about security was a dark joke. The upcoming Willow's annual community gala, a lavish, self-congratulatory affair ostensibly celebrating the harmony and prosperity of the neighborhood, was just a week away. Arthur Jenkins, the philanthropist, the community benefactor, was slated to be the guest of honor. He would be delivering the keynote speech, and rumor had it announcing a generous new community enhancement fund for the Willows, likely a fund that would further consolidate his control via Veronica. It was the perfect stage, Alara realized, with a surge of adrenaline that was part fear, part steely resolve. The perfect public stage for the carefully constructed truth to be revealed, for the mask to be torn away. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of clandestine meetings. Alara, Mark, Mrs. Henderson, and a newly emboldened Mr. Davies formed a small, determined core. They met in hushed tones, in Mrs. Henderson's cluttered sunroom or late at night in Alara's kitchen, the mangled bicycle parts now stored in the garage, a grim reminder of what they were fighting. A handful of other residents, initially terrified, but slowly swayed by Alara's quiet determination, Mark's methodical presentation of his findings and their own simmering grievances, cautiously agreed to help to bear witness. Mrs. Henderson, her earlier fear replaced by a steely indignation, provided meticulously handwritten logs, dating back over a year, detailing Veronica's escalating campaign of harassment against her, complete with dates, times, and verbatim quotes. She'd even, with a surprising cunning, managed to get Veronica to admit on a misdialed voicemail left on her answering machine that the landscaping enhancements levy was non-negotiable if she wanted to avoid further complications with property upkeep assessments. Mr. Davies had a folder thick with photographs of his illegally ticketed van, copies of the exorbitant fines, and even a covertly recorded snippet of Veronica telling him his type of vehicle lowered the tone of the neighborhood. Another resident, a quiet, unassuming accountant named Mr. Peterson, who had once served on the HOA Finance Committee before being subtly ousted by Veronica, had noticed significant irregularities in the Willows' financial statements. Large sums of money were regularly diverted to vaguely described consultancy fees and logistical services, all paid to the opaque Willow Creek Logistics. Each piece of evidence was a thread carefully collected, meticulously documented. Together they were weaving a rope strong and undeniable, a rope they hoped would be strong enough to hang the conspirators, metaphorically speaking. Mark, with his quiet technical wizardry, prepared a comprehensive digital presentation, scanned documents, annotated photographs, detailed timelines linking Veronica's actions to Jenkins' property acquisitions. He even managed to get a surprisingly clear, albeit short, audio recording from a tiny digital voice recorder Alara had accidentally left behind, tucked into a magazine after one of Veronica's particularly intimidating visits. On the recording, Veronica's cool, cultured voice could be heard making a chillingly veiled threat about Leo's continued well-being and access to community amenities if Alara didn't immediately drop her frivolous and disruptive complaints. That recording made Alara's blood run cold every time she heard it, but she knew it was crucial. To add another layer of potential risk and to test Veronica's reaction, Alara, following Mark's advice, let slip to one of Veronica's known gossips that she was considering selling her house due to personal reasons and was meeting with a realtor who specialized in quick, discreet sales. The reaction was almost immediate. The very next day, Alara received an unsolicited, extremely lowball cash offer for her property from an anonymous LLC delivered by courier. The LLC Mark quickly traced was yet another front for Jenkins. This was their MO: create distress, then swoop in. The night of the gala arrived cloaked in an unseasonable chill. The Willows Community Hall, usually a bland, functional space, glittered with an overabundance of fairy lights and the sheen of forced smiles. Veronica Stenton, resplendent in a sequined emerald green gown that likely cost a fortune, moved through the anxious crowd like a queen surveying her domain, her blonde bob gleaming under the spotlights. Arthur Jenkins, smooth avuncular and impeccably dressed in a tailored tuxedo, remained by her side, his arm occasionally resting possessively on her shoulder. Alara, dressed in a simple but elegant dark blue dress she'd owned for years, felt a strange, almost unnerving calm settle over her. Leo was safe, staying overnight with a trusted friend from her old neighborhood, his medication refilled after Alara had made a frantic, expensive emergency trip to a distant 24-hour pharmacy, paying entirely out of pocket. Tonight was not about fear, she told herself, clenching her fists. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming their lives. Jenkins introduced by a gushing, Veronica took the stage to rapturous, almost sycophantic applause, clearly orchestrated by Veronica and her inner circle. He spoke glowingly, his voice rich and persuasive of community spirit, of shared values, of the bright, prosperous future he envisioned for the Willows. He was just reaching the crescendo of his speech, his hand raised about to announce his generous contribution to the newly established Community Enhancement Fund, when Alara positioned near the poorly guarded AV booth, where Mark was calmly but intently making some last-minute adjustments, gave the almost imperceptible signal they had rehearsed. The large projection screen behind Jenkins, which had been displaying a saccharine, endlessly looping slideshow of smiling residents at various staged community events, flickered violently and then changed. Instead of sunny picnics and holiday gatherings, it showed the stark, revealing interior of the Lock and Leave Storage Unit 3B, a photograph Mark had managed to obtain through a disgruntled former employee of the facility, a contact cultivated through an online forum for whistleblowers who had reported highly suspicious activity, and mountains of what looked like stolen mail and packages from that specific unit rented under the name V. Stenton Special Projects. The ex-employee had even managed to snag a partial inventory list before quitting. Then the image switched to the grainy but damning security footage of Veronica at the electronics store purchasing the burner phone. This was followed by scans of the falsified HOA violation notices issued to Alara Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davies, juxtaposed with Mr. Peterson's damning financial report highlighting the exorbitant consultancy fees paid to Willow Creek Logistics. Finally, a map appeared stark and accusing, showing the target properties, Alara's home, Mrs. Henderson's, Mr. Davies, and several others, highlighted in blood red, surrounded by Jenkins' existing holdings. A shocked, disbelieving silence fell over the room, so profound that the hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Jenkins faltered mid-sentence, his amiable, practiced smile freezing, then cracking on his face. His eyes darted to the screen, then back to the audience, a flicker of panic in their depths. Veronica's head snapped towards the screen, her perfectly made-up face draining of all color, leaving behind a ghastly mottled pallor. Her mouth opened, then closed like a fish, gasping for air. Alara's voice, clear, steady, and amplified by the microphone Mark had expertly patched her into from the AV booth, cut through the stunned silence like a shard of ice. "Mr. Jenkins, Mrs. Stenton, you speak so eloquently of community. But what kind of community thrives on theft, on intimidation, on deceit, on the systematic destruction of people's lives for profit?" She laid out the entire sordid scheme, her words precise, measured, and unwavering. She spoke of the stolen medical supplies that had endangered her son's life, of the brutal symbolic vandalism of his bicycle, of the relentless campaign of psychological harassment designed to drive vulnerable residents from their homes. As she spoke, Mark, a silent conductor of chaos from his booth, projected more evidence onto the screen. Mrs. Henderson's tragically withered roses next to a scanned payment record from the HOA's opaque discretionary fund, to an unknown, unlicensed horticultural specialist service that, according to bank records, only ever serviced Veronica's own immaculate property. Next came photos of Mr. Davies' repeatedly ticketed van alongside damning emails Mark had managed to recover from a discarded HOA laptop, showing Veronica instructing a local tow company to be extra vigilant and proactive regarding any vehicles parked at Mr. Davies' address, promising them generous bonuses for compliance. Finally, the audio recording played, Veronica's cool, threatening voice, unmistakable and chilling, filling the suddenly silent hall. Leo's continued well-being and access to community amenities. Drop your frivolous and disruptive complaints. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a sound of dawning horror and burgeoning anger. This is an outrage. Jenkins blustered, his face now flushed a dangerous crimson, trying desperately to regain control, but his voice trembled, betraying his panic. Slander. These are baseless, malicious accusations. This woman is clearly unhinged. Veronica, however, seemed to crumble visibly under the weight of the evidence and the hostile stares of her community. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but finding only expressions of shock, disgust, and betrayal. Suddenly, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria, pointing a trembling, bejeweled finger at a stunned Arthur Jenkins. It was him. He made me do it. All of it. The pressure, the incentives. He promised me a share, a significant share. One of Jenkins' private security men, a large, thuggish individual who had been lurking near the stage, made a sudden move towards the AV booth, clearly intending to silence Mark. But Mr. Davies, surprisingly agile for his burly frame, stepped directly into his path, arms crossed, a grim look on his face. "I don't think so, pal." The security man hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance from a resident. That's when old Mrs. Henderson stood up, her frail body trembling, but her voice surprisingly strong and clear, amplified by a secondary microphone. Another of Alara's new allies had discreetly passed to her. "She threatened me." Mrs. Henderson declared, her gaze fixed on Veronica. "She told me if I didn't vote her way on the initial rezoning proposal for the Greenbelt, my property taxes would mysteriously triple due to a reassessment of lot value based on proximity to undeveloped land. She ruined my roses. My late husband planted those roses." Mr. Davies, emboldened, stepped forward. "She fined me into near bankruptcy over nothing. Then just last month, Jenkins' Willow Creek Logistics Company sent me an insulting offer, pennies on the dollar for my house, saying they were helping homeowners in financial distress." More voices joined in a sudden rising chorus of grievances, long suppressed, of petty tyrannies, endured in silence. The carefully constructed, glittering facade of the Willows shattered, crumbling like cheap plaster, revealing the rotten, corrupted core beneath. In the ensuing chaos, as Jenkins, his face a mask of fury, tried to make a discreet exit towards a side door, only to be blocked by a group of angry residents, and Veronica dissolved into incoherent, weeping hysterics. The flashing blue and red lights of police cars appeared outside the community hall's large windows, painting the scene in strobes of stark justice. Alara had, through a lawyer friend, who had quietly entered the gala as a guest and had been surreptitiously filming the proceedings, ensured that the local police department were not just alerted, but already armed with a comprehensive summary of the evidence and sworn affidavits. They had been waiting discreetly down the street, ready to act. The takedown was swift and decisive. Arthur Jenkins, his smooth charm, completely vanished, replaced by a snarl of impotent fury and disbelief, was escorted out in handcuffs, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. Veronica Stenton, no longer the imperious queen of the Willows, but a weeping, disheveled mess, her mascara streaking her ruined face, followed soon after. Her emerald green designer gown seemed grotesquely incongruous against the cold, unforgiving steel of the police restraints. Even Henderson, the watchful attendant from Lock and Leave, was picked up later that night, trying to shred documents at the storage facility. His discretion had run out. In the weeks and months that followed, the full staggering extent of Jenkins and Veronica's criminal operation came to light. The raided storage unit yielded a veritable treasure trove of stolen goods. Not just Leo's medication and Alara's craft supplies, but electronics, jewelry, irreplaceable family heirlooms, even pets that had run away, all meticulously, chillingly logged, by Veronica presumably for later anonymous sale or disposal. The financial records of Willow Creek Developments, Willow Creek Logistics, and the now-defunct Willows HOA revealed a complex interwoven web of bribery, fraud, extortion, and systematic coercion. Asset seizure proceedings began immediately against Jenkins and his various shell companies. The recovered funds were earmarked for restitution to the many victims and to settle the numerous lawsuits that quickly materialized, not just from the Willows, but from other communities Jenkins had targeted. The Willows Homeowners Association was summarily disbanded by court order. An interim community council, with a reluctant but resolute Ilara agreeing to serve as an advisor, was formed by the residents themselves. Their first task was to rewrite the bylaws from scratch, ensuring complete transparency, accountability, and protections for homeowners. The stolen items were, where possible, returned to their rightful owners, each reunion a small victory against the darkness they had endured. For what couldn't be replaced, the peace of mind, the sense of security, the sentimental value of lost heirlooms, financial compensation was eventually paid from Jenkins' seized assets. The community, shaken to its core, but resolute, began the slow, arduous process of healing. Neighbors who had previously lived in fearful, isolated silence started talking, sharing, and supporting one another. Barbecues were held not with forced gaiety, but with genuine warmth. The oppressive atmosphere of suspicion and judgment that Veronica had cultivated for so long lifted, replaced by a tentative but steadily growing sense of genuine, resilient community. Mrs. Henderson's garden was being lovingly replanted by a team of volunteers from the neighborhood, a vibrant riot of new color and life, slowly replacing the blight Veronica had wrought. Mr. Davies started a small neighborhood handyman service, his van now a welcome sight. Mr. Peterson became the interim treasurer, his quiet integrity a balm. Ilara stood on her porch, no longer a place of dread, but of quiet contemplation. She watched Leo race gleefully down the sidewalk on his brand-new state-of-the-art specially adapted bicycle. It was a generous anonymous gift from several neighbors who had pooled their resources, a silent acknowledgement of his suffering and her courage. His laughter, bright, carefree, and untroubled, echoed in the clear, crisp afternoon air, a sound more beautiful than any music. Her online craft business was slowly but surely thriving, buoyed by a wave of unexpected support from her newfound friends and allies within the Willows, and even from sympathetic strangers who had read about their ordeal in the local news. The Willows was no longer a gilded cage ruled by fear and deceit. It was a place slowly, painstakingly, sometimes painfully becoming a true home, a testament to the resilience of ordinary people who had found extraordinary courage when pushed too far. The fight had been harrowing, the personal cost immense, but as Ilara looked at her son, his face alight with pure, unadulterated joy as he mastered a new trick on his bike, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that it had been worth every single agonizing, terrifying moment. Justice, like the newly planted roses in Mrs. Henderson's vibrant garden, had finally beautifully, and against all odds, bloomed.